Okay, so hello everybody. If you're all rested and had a good time on your Chicago trip, I just want to do this quick tutorial that will show you how to get your line work out of Rhino and into Illustrator, and just a couple helpful tips in between to help you get your drawings ready for Tuesday. Remember, you'll have drawings listed on the assignment sheet. I believe there's a plan, elevation section, as well as axon, and we will want those rendered in V-Ray and covered in line. Unfortunately, I don't have V-Ray on here. I will send us a couple quick tips out where to find things in V-Ray and edit things around. So for this exercise, I'm just going to use some lines and then another drawing I have in Illustrator. Okay, so as you can see, I developed this little shape that's probably similar to a lot of your projects. It's a hypercurved surface that's sort of a vault. It's actually based off of an Enrique Morales building. If you're familiar with him, he's a Catalan architect. As you can see here, I have my poly surface, and then over here I have my mesh, which is tessellated. Many of you may be making meshes in Rhino, according to Mara's tutorial. However, when you export, you do not have to export a mesh as an STL to open it into ZPrint. ZPrint software will do that automatically, so you're more than welcome to just use your poly surface exporting it. The thing with a mesh is you won't be able to create drawings with it. So that's why I suggest using a poly surface, and just kind of using a mesh is just a way of checking your geometry kind of more in depth. But as long as you have a closed poly surface that is watertight and has no naked edges and no non-manifold edges, you should be good to go. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start here. I'm going to make my drawing. So it's kind of a refresher course. I'm going to make 2D. Remember, this is going to be kind of from the view you're looking at. So right now I'm in perspective view. So now that I kind of think of it, I probably wanted to do this in isometric view. So if I go to set view, I can go to isometric, and it's got the cardinal directions set here. So maybe I'll go like this, and I'll just kind of scooch that out. Remember, this is your gumball, which can be turned on right here, this arrow and circle. And this is kind of a quick way of moving things around. Again, a refresher. So I kind of want the other view. So I'm going to go southeast, which will flip it. There we go. Now, one thing you probably want to do even before you make 2D is to set up your view. And this is kind of a thing that will tie in with rendering, that you are able to kind of render in a specific named view. So say, for instance, I have this view, but I want to do it more kind of add an oblique. So I kind of want to get that surface like so. This is not now a normal view. So what I want to do is I want to save this view. I like the way it's set up. I want to go to set view. So you can have to see all these options here. What you want to select is this car and save little floppy disk. This will let you save a view that you're looking at right now, which is currently this. So I will click this, and it'll ask me for a name of the view. It will do a constant string of characters. You don't want to have any spaces in there, so usually you can just do like an underscore or something. So I'm going to say rendered axon or something, and I'm going to hit enter. So now if I, for some reason, need to manipulate my model and do all kinds of weirdness, and I zoom out and like that, I can then go here. I can go to set view, and I can say rendered axon, which is listed under my named views right here. So I hit rendered axon, and it goes right back to where I began. So that way you can match your drawing and your axon. That is kind of the key to doing this exercise, or this kind of drawing, is that you will want to match your rendered axon with your drawing axon, so that they are, they're copacetic together, and it just looks good. Otherwise, the effect won't work and it'll look ridiculous. So what I want to do is I want to go make 2D. And again, this is a refresher. You can see I'm just going to current view, which is this rendered axon. I don't want to do any of those. I have a couple of these options right here that I think some of you are already familiar with. We'll just go over. And this is hidden lines. It's going to show any line that is not viewed or that is sort of obscured by a surface. So that is kind of your prerogative. If you want to show if your geometry is easier to read with more hidden lines, then you should kind of think about showing that geometry. Or you can just turn that off. You don't have to show hidden lines if it's clear what we're looking at. I can also click this button, which is Maintain Source Layers. Again, I've gone over this. This is a button that will keep the layer properties of the object on the drawing. So if it's going to draw a line here along this edge, it's going to keep that same layer, this purple layer that I have, which is just one single layer. Okay, and it's going to actually make a bunch of layers. This will be important when we go into Illustrator. So I'm going to hit OK and let it think a little bit, and it's going to dump this right at the origin. So you can see I've got my drawing. I can move it around. Ta-da! And again, it's purple, so it maintains those source layers. So let's look at this really quick. So you can see here, it didn't do a very good job of completing this curve. So there's a couple ways around this. So one, you could just do the manual way, which is probably the easiest and quickest way. You can just sort of fudge it a little bit. So I can type in extend, and that will kind of let me pick a line and pull it off. Now you can see it doesn't do a very good job with the, well, it actually gets pretty close. Right about there. That's kind of the way that curve will float. It's kind of tricky to do it with kind of spline and parabolic curves, but you can kind of work with that. The other option is to, my escape, is to work with my tolerance settings. So I'm going to go to units. So if you're unfamiliar, if you're still a little bit confused about tolerance, tolerance refers to this value, the absolute tolerance, absolute referring to the entire document. Tolerance meaning the sort of accuracy with which things are created or rendered or sort of come together or modeled. It's measured in decimal units, so the smaller the tolerance, the more accurate it will be. One point of advice is to not just jam 0 and go really small, because it is just going to be too much math for it to do. You'll probably want to go closer to maybe 0.00001 or something like that. It doesn't matter. Now again, this will affect the whole document, so in terms of how models are kind of rendered or how it perceives units, etc., that's what it will change. I'm going to change that really quickly. And again, if you're not familiar, if it's easier for you to understand it in this sort of traditional architectural number system, you can change it like that. If you understand, 0.25 feet is 4 inches, then, right? Yeah. You can change it like there. So that's just kind of a quick tip. Change that. Hit OK. Now you can see I don't actually have any hidden lines. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw some hidden lines, just so if somebody wants to do that, they can see how that works. I think some of you guys have already experimented with it. Again, this is just a refresher to make sure everybody's on the same page. So I'm going to go to my rendered axon view. I'm going to make 2D the same way, but I'm going to click hidden lines. I don't really want to maintain source layers. It'll be easier to read. So it's going to make a hidden line layer. That's important because it'll affect Illustrator, like I said. So I'm going to let it think. And again, the lower the tolerance, the more time it may take for it to create a drawing because it's thinking more. Okay, so you can see it's generated all these hidden lines after I selected the hidden line option as white. That's kind of the default. Now you can see it is going to take that command literally. It is going to generate any hidden edge that is obscured by any surface into your drawing. And we don't necessarily want to see all these hidden lines. You can see right now it's kind of a mess. It's kind of ugly. So that is going to be your task to kind of go through and parse through the lines it made to kind of get your drawing to read the correct way. So like for instance, we probably don't want to see these interior curves where it's showing the sort of thickness of the plate on these hidden lines. It's just too much geometry and it's going to blob and look bad. So maybe I delete those. And it's kind of a manual process of going through and figuring out what lines I want to keep and what I don't want. So like that line, like that's just kind of an edge condition here that's going to form to this edge and that bottom face right there. So I don't know if I want that necessarily, or even this one or that one. And it's beginning to look a little bit clear. Remember, we're reading this line as sort of continuous through the system. We're just kind of giving an indication of what is happening below surfaces. So that's kind of how hidden lines would work. You can see here it's even drawing the hidden lines of this edge right there. That doesn't necessarily make any sense in this case because we know that it's going to curve around and our renders are going to help that. So anyways, that's kind of how you would create your hidden line drawing. A quick tip that I think I've, again, already shown people is to generate an object outline. You already kind of have lines on the outside that you can easily change here. However, I want to make an object outline. Now, in order to kind of control my thing, I'm going to do this, or my drawing in Illustrator, I'm going to create layers that will associate with certain line weights so that I know which ones are which. Oh, excuse me. So I'm going to make a new layer. I'm going to say this is going to be object outline. Object outline. And I'm going to change the color from black to, I don't know, so many colors. I kind of want to do that green. I'm going to go on that layer. I'm going to go on that layer. There we go. Okay, and I'm going to type in the command curve boolean. So what curve boolean will do, actually it's easier to do this, if I select all my curves and type in curve boolean and let it think. Again, the more curves you have, the harder it's going to think. It's going to let me pick areas that it's going to draw a singular line around. So wherever this black line is where it's going to generate a line. So I just have to kind of click through my spaces to get what you want. You can see having these kind of extra hidden lines is actually going to be a detriment to you if you have all these extra lines. Okay, I'm just going to do a couple areas here. I'm not going to do the whole thing. So we'll just do this like vault right there. Okay, so you can see it's going to make that kind of shape. If I hit enter, it automatically makes that line. I can then kind of join it. Whoops. Yeah, there we go. So I want to, it's actually already joined. So hopefully you can see that. I'm going to change this color to, I'll change it to bright red. Maybe you'll be able to see it more. So there's my line. Okay, and I just have that on the object outline. Now for the other lines, it's already made layers for that, so we can keep them on there, or we can organize things if we want, you know, sort of thick, thinnest lines. We can create layers for that. The key is that these layers, whatever line geometry we export to Illustrator, is going to be remembered. So it's going to keep it on the same layer, so it's going to make it really easy to work within Illustrator. We're not going to have to go and select individual lines and change those. You can, if that is your prerogative, you're more than welcome to. But I wouldn't recommend that. Okay, so we have our final drawing. I'm done. If I want to, I can do line weights in Rhino. Again, it's up to you. You would just edit through that this interface here to edit those line weights like we've been doing. But you are more than welcome to do in Illustrator. We're already working in Illustrator. What I'm going to do is I'm going to export. So you notice I can either type export or I can go to File, Export Selected. Do not save as. Save as will not export it correctly to Illustrator. This is the same for your zprint file. You do not want to save as an STL. You want to export as an STL. Saving as will take all of the geometry on your document and just export it straight out. That is a no-no. We don't want any of that stuff, and it'll screw your file up. Okay, so I'm going to select. I'm going to go File, Export Selected, and it's going to open up a dialog box, and I just have to literally, it's as easy as just selecting Adobe Illustrator, and I'm going to say Illustrator export or something, and I'm just going to go to Desktop, and I'm going to save. And it is going to ask me a couple questions that are a little bit important. So you do not want to have a snapshot of the current view. What it's going to do is it's just going to take an image of what you're looking at and just make that line work. You want it to a scale. You want it to the scale that you are drawing in. So it's going to ask you what the model scale is. You want to always ask, it's always, if you're in inches, it's going to ask you how many inches are in an inch. So if you notice, 1 inch does not equal 12 inches because that doesn't make any sense. You can say 1 inch equals 1 inch, and that way it will keep the scale of your model, of your drawing. See, it's an RGB, you can see like, hey, that's kind of irrelevant. You can change that in Illustrator. You don't want to export any of these. These options are totally unnecessary. If I hit OK, then I will have written it as an AI file. So if you need to kind of scale your drawing, a kind of quick tip is to just draw your work set. Your little, so we're doing 11 by 17s. So you can see this actually fits perfectly on an 11 by 17. What a coincidence. Remember, we want to fill the page. We don't want, it's okay to have some of this white space, some of this, but we don't want to have, a teeny tiny drawing. So we can either scale things up, scale things down. If you're not really concerned with the sort of numerical scale of it, if it's, a 1/8 inch equals a foot, whatever, you can just use your gumball. If you click one of these squares, in this view it's either green or red, click and hold shift, it will just shrink the whole thing sort of absolutely to get what you want. So you can go up and down and up and down. So that's kind of a quick tip. So I'm going to go back there. Okay, so this is how you just make sure your drawing is going to be at the correct scale. Okay, now unfortunately, again, I don't have V-Ray, so I won't be able to show you with this particular drawing how to insert a V-Ray file into Illustrator, but I will do that with another drawing. So let's jump to Illustrator. You can see I have some of these drawings loaded up. I'm going to zoom in here. Okay, now again, I know a lot of you told me that you know Illustrator pretty well, so I'm kind of assuming that. However, this could just be a refresher, etc. We're just going to go over some quick basic things. So again, Illustrator is a vector program. It is technically a drafting program. It's made up of lines, not rasterized lines like Photoshop is. So it's not dots, it's actual mathematical lines. Which is what we want you to draw. We do not want to see any rasterized lines. That will be given an automatic 0. So that includes any like Rhino screenshots. That would be a rasterized image. So no screenshots. We want you to render and then put that render underneath a line drawing. And we will use Illustrator to do this. Okay, so a couple things. I know sometimes the new Illustrator is a little bit dumb and doesn't put your command bar, which is this bar up here, up onto your screen all the time. Easy enough to fix. You just go to Window and make sure Control is checked, and that is how you will get your command bar up here. Layers are going to be down here. You can see I only have one layer right now because this is a consolidated set. I did these drawings individually and then put them together. But you would have all your layers here. There's a couple quick buttons that will help you do things easily. If I click this circle button, that is going to select anything that's on that layer. So say, for instance, you have a thin line weight layer. You just select that and you type in the correct line weight that you want to associate with that layer. If I click on an object, it will tell me what layer it's on. So if I have a bunch of layers, it will put a box right next to the layer in that layer color. So you can see this layer is blue, and it will show me that it's on that layer. If I want to move it to another layer, let's see, I will make another layer, and we'll have to do this for our render layer, so I'm just going to do this ahead of time. Okay, so I'm going to do this red one. I can just click and hold and drag that up. So now you can see that this object outline is now on my render layer. Layers in Illustrator work consecutively, or sort of in order. So the first layer is going to be the topmost thing, and the bottom layer is going to be the bottommost thing. So perhaps we want this render layer below. If I click and hold and just drag it, and drag it down, and I have my render or my layers in the correct order. And again, if I select things, there's nothing on this layer right now, but if I move this object to that layer, if I go like this, oops, I select, there it is, and that's the only object on there. Okay, go back here. Okay, so I have my drawings, they're all line weighted up, you know, stroke, etc. We want you guys to be using automatic black. So if I go here, I have my fill, my line work, my fill, my line work, which are the same thing. They do the exact same thing. We want you to use automatic. So automatic, if I look at my swatch menu here, automatic refers to the blackest black that a printer can make. Remember, I kind of explained before, there is a difference between black or automatic black and photo black. Photo black is different. Photo black is kind of a mixture of a bunch of colors, and automatic black is like black. It's used, they use separate cartridges, they use separate, sort of almost sometimes separate methods. If you're using a toner printer, it's a totally different ballgame. We just want you to associate all of your line work with black. So if you mix and match the two, so say I do one line black and the other one is automatic or registration black, that's the other name for it, which is always identified with this little crosshairs, they'll look different when they print out, and you'll run into a lot of problems, especially if you have thick lines and then there's two different tones. It'll be really weird. So that's just kind of that. You can see it's already set up to automatic, so we're good. Okay, now to the everything. The point you've all been waiting for is putting your drawing into Illustrator. So I'm going to go to File, Place. So that is what will put a image into Illustrator. So I go to File, Place. I go and find my image when it opens the dialog box. So I just so happen to know that they're on my desktop, and it's 1, 2. I'm gonna pick 2. All right, so you can see now what it's done is it's made my cursor kind of this image. It's drawn a little diagram of the image, and it's got my little crosshairs here, and it's letting me pick anywhere. So what all I have to do is just kind of click, and it puts that image at the size that it was made onto my document. So you can see right now it's just kind of floating in my layer 1, and again I want to move this to my render layer, so I just click, drag, and you can see it changes that bounding box to red. So whatever bounding box color it is now going to be kind of it's going to associate with that layer, if that makes any sense. Okay, so now you can see it's clearly not the same scale as my drawing, which is this one right here. What I want to do, well, I'll kind of zoom out, is I can either go 2 different ways. I can kind of stupidly scale it, which is just taking my arrows and dragging it, or I can scale it mathematically. So I'll show you how to scale mathematically first. What I want to do is I want to go to Object. So Object is about sort of anything like lines, fills, images in the file. That is what Object will have all your options for. I want to go to Object, I want to go to Transform, and I want to go to Scale. So you can see the way Illustrator scales things is through a percentage value. What you want to do is kind of do a little quick math in your head to figure out where you're going. So for instance, if I want to do 3/4 scale of this image, I have to go 75% down. So hopefully that makes sense. So if I hit preview, see it's going to shrink it like that, 75%. So I'm going to hit yes, and it's going to scale that. So I'm going to go back. Now I want to do it, maybe we'll say I want to make it bigger. We'll go twice the scale. I'm going to multiply that by 2, so I'm going 2 times up, which is going to be 200. You don't want to mess with non-uniform. Always keep it uniform. Uniform will mean it'll just shrink the entire thing. It won't just shrink the X direction or the Y direction. So I'm going to hit OK, and you see it makes it twice as big, which doesn't really help us anymore. So I think for this particular application, the kind of best method is the kind of dumb, stupid, like just shrinking it like that. I think that is the easiest, quickest way to do it. You're not going to just get it mathematically correct every time. So if I hold Shift and I drag it, it's going to keep it the same dimensions, and I can just kind of drag it to the right size. And a quick kind of, or a helpful tip is to kind of pick a point on your drawing. So I'm going to pick like this stair point right here. Pick a point and associate your image with that, and just kind of drag and keep moving it to that point until you get it to fit. So I'm going to keep going. Keep going. See, it's not quite there yet, so I'm just going to kind of move this around again. Oops. It's kind of a little bit along on that side. Now, you're never going to actually get this totally perfect. As you can see, if we zoom in here, this is a rasterized image, so this is like pixels underneath a vector drawing. So they're just not quite even, but you can see we're almost at a borderline, whoops. We're almost at a borderline no, I don't want to watch Netflix right now. Go away. We're almost at a borderline kind of microscopic level. So this stuff like will not show up. So you just kind of want to be aware of that. So we're almost there. We kind of want to avoid where we see kind of the white outlines of things. We just kind of want to mess with it. So it's actually a little bit too small right now. So maybe we just kind of go here and just drag it a little bit. There we go. And I think it's pretty close. Maybe a hair off in this direction. Just kind of keep going, and it looks like we're pretty good. Now you're probably looking at this. This is an older render. It's a little kind of dark and a little gray. We kind of want to show a little bit more white. So we can use our opacity settings, which is just, you know, how much light are you letting through your object. So right now 100% opacity means I'm letting no light in. I can change it to 75, and that lightens it up significantly. You don't want to go terribly far down. So say if I do 10%, you're going to get like literally nothing. You probably want to stick closer. 25% gives us that. So you can see we're just barely reading some of this stuff, just barely. See, this is significantly darker. If I go to maybe 60%, yeah, that's pretty good. We get a nice kind of gradient here that we can read this curved pipe. Instead of read the gradient on this kind of lopsided chimney. We can read kind of the gradient on the stairs. We can see that there's a little bit of darkness that's being reflected off of here from the original object. Okay. So now I have my object. A kind of quick tip is to go to Object and lock it. That way you can kind of manipulate your line work still if you need to without messing up the position of your render. So that will save a lot of headaches. Okay. So that's kind of the basic gist of inserting your image into your file. A couple other quick tips that we can go over is kind of showing hidden lines well. So if I go to, we'll say this kind of edge condition line is, we want to make kind of a dashed line. So, which hidden lines are always shown with thin dashed lines. I want to connect these two. So you can see I want this from this end to be one continuous line. In order to do that, I just select my lines and I click Control J. So that will join it. And you see it's now in a single line. What I then want to do is I want to make this line a dashed line. All I have to do is I click my stroke options panel. You see I've got all these different options. I go to dashed line right here, click dashed line, and you can see it makes it a first kind of pass by putting 12 point and then, a gap and then etc. You see that looks ridiculous. It almost looks like stray lines. It's not quite hidden lines. So I just kind of shrink it down. So maybe we do, what, 2, and we'll do 1. So now you can see we're getting a pretty nice hidden line. It's beginning to look solid, but not terrible. Terribly solid. It's always kind of a good rule of thumb to keep kind of wider dashes and then smaller gaps. So wider dash, smaller gap, wider dash, smaller gap. You can kind of play with these to get dash dots. You would do a dash, space, dot, dash, dash, space, dot, space, dash, space. So it gets a little bit complicated. So that's kind of the gist of that. You can see there's a couple options right here. There's these 2 boxes. This will kind of, you always want to just smash the hell out of this button. This will kind of align your corners very nicely automatically. You don't want conditions like this where it kind of just ignores corners and you get weird, like incomplete shapes. This kind of completes the shape very nicely and it looks very clean. So you want to always make sure when you're drawing those kind of dashed lines, if there's a corner, you want to just kind of pay attention to that. Kind of spinning off from corners, if I have, just kind of in terms of general lines, if I have a line here, which I don't want dashed, I'm just going to make solid right now. And say I have a, I'm going to click out, and I'm going to go to this edge. Okay, so these are just kind of pretty raw standard lines. You can see if I zoom in, just kind of making a raw line, it does this weird edge condition. Even though they're kind of touching at the corners, it doesn't complete the corner, and that just, it looks bad. So we always want to kind of complete these corners. I just want to select both of my lines and hit Control J, and that will join them. And you can see it kind of curves a nice little rounded edge right there. But as you can see, we don't have necessarily to do that. We could do kind of a mitered edge, which is straight. We can do a chamfered edge, which doesn't really make any sense. That kind of looks weird. But again, we can go to round. So that's kind of how you control your edge conditions. You can see here, at this point, it's got a blunt edge. Maybe we want that rounded. I can go to what's called my cap. So right where this point ends is where it's going to start my cap. So you can see I can just do a butt, which is right at the edge of that point. I can do a round cap, which will draw kind of a round bevel or something around it. Or I can do a square one. So I can just do square, and you can see it makes my square cap. I can do round, and it makes that round. I would probably stick with square and round. It's up to you what you want your drawing to graphically look like. Okay, so that's the basic gists of lines. The one last thing I'm going to show you in Illustrator is how to generate some hatches, some shadow, which you don't necessarily have to do because you're going to have a rendered drawing. Actually, it would probably look weird if you have rendered and then hatches. They would fight each other. But this is just a quick future tip for anything you want to do. Remember, in this class, we do not want you to poche, which means just fill solid black or fill solid gray. We want you to use line work to show those values. So we can do that in Illustrator through hatching. If I select a group of lines that's going to, say I want to hatch this kind of trapezoidal thing, just kind of show some shadow inside this little shed structure. I can highlight, I'll just highlight the whole drawing, this particular drawing, and I'll go up to Object and I'll live paint it. And I'll say Make. And you can see it makes these little stars around my bounding box. That's just to indicate that it is live painted. So if I click it, it's going to keep doing that. And you notice it groups everything. So that's one thing to keep in mind, is it groups all live paint. So what live paint does is it will just read your lines and it will say, okay, I'm reading these lines connected. There's a space in between. I can fill that space. There's these lines connected. I can fill that space too. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click and hold on this button right here, and I'm going to grab my live paint bucket. So I go here, that's where my live paint bucket is. And you can see it's putting a red line around shapes that it knows are fillable. So there. If I go over here, which is not live painted, and click, it'll give me this error that says I can only do live paint in live paint groups. That means I haven't just selected those and told it that there are spaces in here that I want to fill. It's just reading it as lines. Okay, so again, I want to fill this kind of trapezoidal space. What I want to do is first I could fill it with maybe a solid black. So I just go over here and I switch to solid black and fill it. You can see that honestly right now it looks a little bit ridiculous. But, this is how you just get solid black fills in your drawings. You do not want to do this for this class. Again, this is not something this is just showing for future use. We don't want to do that. So we're going to go back. What I want to do is I want to use a hatch to do this. So I'm going to go and I'm going to select my swatch options. You can see I have all these lovely colors, some of which are pretty ugly, but they're just some of the defaults. So I could do colors if I want. No, I have to switch to it. There we go. There's my blue. I'm going to select this hatch option. So remember, we want you to hatch in this class, not to use solid colors. Okay, so if I select this button in the very far left corner, it will ask me, or it will show me all of my swatches that are already preloaded into the Illustrator program. There are a lot of options, some of which are pretty ugly, so you just kind of have to make educated decisions. What we're concerned about is the one all the way down here, which is patterns. This is going to have this is what you're probably going to use the most in terms of hatching and filling objects. So it's going to have sort of three options. You're going to have basic graphics, decorative, and nature. Nature is pretty hideous. Decorative is also pretty hideous. Your basic graphics option is going to have your most valuable sets. So you can see it breaks it down into dots, lines, and textures. I'm going to select lines, and you can see it opens this swatch menu that will then act like my new swatch, so I can open this one at the same time as this. This will act as my new swatch menu. So if I kind of open both at the same time, if I click on any of these options, say I click these first two ones, they add them right into my swatches, so it will remember what you're using. So I'm going to select this first one, and I'm going to hatch it right there. Comes out great. So I have it hatched. Now you're probably saying the hatches are huge. They're thick. They look weird. They're at an angle. And you would be right. They don't match the line work. They're just too strange looking. What I want to do is I want to expand my live paint. I'm going to click this button, expand at the top. And what it does is it basically says, okay, I want to edit all of these live paint shapes that I've made. So it's basically going to go revert back to what you had before your live paint. However, it still keeps things in groups. So I'm going to ungroup it. And I have to do it again one more time, ungroup, in order to be able to select this particular object. So you can see this thing that I made is now kind of a shape that I can then kind of manipulate. So you can use that to your advantage. You can kind of manipulate the way these shapes look. You can pull them off, etc. It's up to you. I think we probably want to just keep it back in the same spot. So if I go all the way back, come on. Whoops. Okay, now, so we are going to make these thinner. To do that, we want to go to my swatch option, or my sort of swatch set, and I'm going to double click the swatch itself, the one that I used, and it's going to open up a pattern option. You can see it totally changes. We're now in the pattern that it's using to make that swatch. You can see if I click, it's actually just a bunch of lines that it's made. So I can just highlight everything and just tell it I want it at a thin line weight. So I can say 0.25. So you can see now it's really thin. I could even give an opacity in this option straight up. So now they're barely see them. They're just there. So it's, again, kind of your job to manipulate them to get them to read as well as you want. Now, this is actually going to save this particular swatch change. So if I change these line weights, it's going to save that permanently, and it's going to affect any other place I put that. So if you want to make this kind of an independent swatch, but you want to keep the same kind of patterning, just a lighter line weight or sort of a dimmer line weight, you would just save a copy up in this option right here. I'm just going to hit done because I don't really care. And you can see it just changed that line weight to the correct one. So now it's thin. Maybe I do want to make it a little bit lighter, so maybe I'll say it's at 75% opacity. If I do that, it makes it a little bit lighter and kind of reads the shadow. If I zoom out, it begins to kind of read as a shadow. They're a little bit wide right now, and they're kind of in a weird direction. So let's see if we can change the direction to get that to help. So I'm going to go to Transform, and I'm going to go to Rotate. Remember, we're rotating these lines so that maybe they're at an angle or something. Maybe they're at 45. I don't know. It's up to you. You probably don't want to show it like this because it looks a little bit strange. So I'm going to Rotate. You can see this gives my Rotate options. It's giving me a little box that I can just willy-nilly rotate everything. Or I can assign a specific value. I'm going to write 45. If I click, so if I go here to my options, it's going to ask me transform objects or transform patterns or both. So again, the object is the shape itself, this kind of trapezoidal block. You want to kind of think of these things as sort of blocks coming together to make an image. That's kind of how paintings and other things work. It's how we read drawings. We want to think we just want to just do these patterns. So I'm going to uncheck transform objects and just rotate this pattern 45 degrees. If I preview it, you can see it rotates that pattern, and it does begin to look pretty nice. And now it's starting to kind of read a little bit better than it did before. Okay, so you can see I adjusted that hatch. Again, I can keep manipulating it. Maybe I want it even lighter, kind of like that. It is your choice how to kind of work with that. If, say, for instance, you don't even want, what you made all your changes, you don't even want these anymore, you can just go up to your swatches. Again, pull up your swatch library and change it to something different. So I can change it to this, which is pretty weird looking, but you know, the concept's still the same. And again, it's kind of showing up gray because I have an opacity assigned to it. If I change that back to 100, it's going to change them. Some of these are actually pretty hideous. That, yeah, they're kind of dumb looking. They're really just for like kind of like barcodes. That's not bad. So anyways, that is kind of the basic gist of what you will need to be doing in Illustrator, and a couple tips to help you in the future. I'm just going to delete this for now. Hope I did check again your files. Everything is looking good. I will let you know if you are good to go for 3D printing. We will decide that on Tuesday. So those who will 3D print will submit their files to the RCP on Tuesday, right after our review. So just be aware of that. Remember that people who laser cut will not 3D print. So 2 of the people in your teams will 3D print, and then that last person who doesn't 3D print will CNC. So you want to kind of think about, well, maybe is my object better for 3D printing or CNCing? Depending on how many changes you've made, you know, it could kind of work better one way or another. We'll have to see. otherwise, I was very pleased to see the work. I think it looked good. I liked the way you guys were changing your models. Some of you still have to keep kind of working your models a little bit more. But I was pleased with the changes. Not a lot of errors. I think people are pretty much set up for 3D printing. So if you have any questions, please email me, and I am looking forward to seeing your stuff on Tuesday. And please be sure to check out my ZPrint tutorial as well. That will kind of tell you how to generate some stuff in ZPrint real quickly. This is a pretty simple task to do in ZPrint. All right, see you guys on Tuesday.